Okay, we are back for part 2. And this part, I think what we're going to handle is the UV unwrap, and we're going to do texturing as well. Because you guys are going to have to do a lot of objects, it's going to be up to you whether or not you're going to spend a lot of your time on like a big object like this, and then spend less time doing smaller objects like an apple with less geometry and less kind of interesting textures, or glass. I'll do a tutorial in a little bit that includes glass shaders, and that requires pretty much no texturing at all. You just slap a cool glass shader on it. But for now, we're going to finish this one, and I expect you guys to have at least one kind of complex looking object. Alright, so first thing that we're going to have to do is lay out our UVs. So thankfully for us, the UVs for our seeds are already laid out, so all we have to do is the melon itself. So this is pretty easy to do. All we have to do is go into our texture editor, and let's think about this logically first. What kind of faces do we want to separate? Now I know what I want to be the base of the melon, but you can see that that's a little harder to select at the moment because what I did was create edge loops that went all the way around, so we have to deselect some geometry, make sure to get all of it. Alright. Actually, you know what? I'm going to include this edge loop as the rind. Okay. So I'm going to project my UVs. I'm going to do it in planar mapping. Oops. To make sure it's in the right axis. Oh, it was in the y-axis, so it was fine. So I already know that it's going to be reversed because we want this side to be rendered and it's projecting down like this. So we're going to have to flip this red to blue. And then I'm going to grab the whole shell. It looks like it did that thing again. So you can see that what happened is my UVs became a bunch of shells, and this happens sometimes when you're working on kind of more advanced geometry. The easy way to remedy this is to create UVs and do a planar map on the entire object, and then come back in and get everything you want. And when we try it again, when we do it this time, it should work. That seems to be the workaround at the moment. Not ideal, but just one of those other things that we have to deal with. Planar mapping, so it doesn't look like it changed, but now it's a separate map. And I'm gonna flip it, and I'm gonna unfold. It should be, it looks like it's still one piece. Let's try deleting our history. There we go. Alright, and that unfolded pretty nicely. It's what you would imagine the skin of a cut piece of watermelon to look like. Cool. And I'm just gonna bring that over to the side. And And what's next? So I'm looking at this, and I think the next thing I want to do is kind of the hard part of the inside of the melon. So that's easy enough. All I have to do is grab that whole UV shell. And actually, because it's already projected flat, all I really need to do is grab the edge where I want it separated. And I'm going to call it this one for now. I'm going to include this edge loop of faces onto the soft part of the melon. And when I'm texturing, I'm going to make this kind of like a lighter red, so it's mixing in with kind of like the whitish rind. So all I have to do is grab this edge loop and cut. And now I have this separated faces. And now it's simple enough to just unfold this. And let's see. I think I'm even going to go so far as to cut my UVs along these two edges. And I'm going to have two shells, and that'll help my unwrapping be a little bit more accurate. It's not trying to stretch. And in fact, I'm going to grab these faces, and you can do this in the UV texture editor, and I'm going to redo the UVs. I'm going to do it based on camera, create UVs based on camera. And now I'm going to unwrap this. I actually use unwrap UVs based on camera quite a bit. It's always a good way to get really quick UVs based on the correct projection. So if you were doing, you were projecting UVs straight on from the top or from the side, it's not quite as good as if it's on the angle where most of these faces are pointing towards. Alright. And I think I'm just going to rotate this one. And I think I'm just going to scale it down because I know it's on the side that I'm not too worried about, so I'm just going to bring it in like that. And this is our next big piece. So right away, I think I'm going to cut along this edge. And the reason I'm doing that is because that edge is kind of beyond that edge. The faces behind that edge are not going to be seen by my render. So I can focus on this other half of the UV shell. So I'm going to cut a few times. I'm going to grab the group of faces that I want. And then these I'm going to just do kind of like a normal unwrap. Actually turned out kind of nice. And this one is not going to come out nearly as nice. We might actually have to cut this up some more because there's a lot of weird geometry going on. But let's see what this looks like with a checker. Oh, good chance to save. Trying to be better. Alright. Alright. Apply a new Lambert. Double click. Checker. Make sure our view texture button is on. And I mean, that doesn't look terrible. What I could do is separate the UVs along this edge. And what might happen is because you're looking at this watermelon and you think, well, this has a big chunk out of it, so the surface inside this chunk is probably not the same as this, so it would be okay if I had a UV texture seam along these edges around, but I'm going to decide to leave it as one piece. So I think that's almost it. I mean, we got our the rind, we got the main face that we're worried about as so far as what's going to be towards the camera. And I'm actually just going to scale this up a bit. And then we have the rind, and that actually fits nicely around there, so it seems about the same size. And then we have this face and these faces. So what I think I'm going to do is try and get these all on one texture. So it's okay to have one object share all the same textures, has the same texture, but not multiple objects, at least not for now. And here's something that I haven't explained quite right. So when I hit the 3 to smooth my mesh, and this is what we're going to want for our render, you can see that it changes how our UVs are laid out in a bad way. You can see that there's a lot of distortion going on here, and this edge loop that we wanted nice for our our gradient for the rind and the meat is kind of wavy and doesn't look quite right. So let's see if we can fix that real quick. The way I'm gonna see if we can do that is going by into actually first delete history. Alright, and now I'm gonna go into the attribute editor, and under the shape, sphere shape P, sphere shape 2, there is a little tab that says smooth mesh. I'm going to click on that, and that gives us a bunch of options. I believe subdiv controls, propagate, smooth triangles. Let's see if we can mess around with our UVs in this case. Oh, that's what we want, UV boundaries. Seems like the smooth is giving us the best result. Let's see what this is doing to our UVs. So you can see in this case, it's keeping the UVs even when we're smooth to the original UVs, and when we switch over to smooth, it's obviously starting to change the UVs based on this, but it's not quite right. Let's see if we can go into the UVs and unwrap this a little more. Looks like we're going to just have to deal with that stretching for now. Fortunately, it's not too bad in this case. One way to get around this altogether is to, instead of dynamically smooth our object, I'm just going to create a copy. So I'm going to duplicate, I'm going to move this one to the side, and I'm going to come back into my invisible layer, and I'm going to add that object. And now I'm just going to smooth this mesh the traditional way like we were doing in class. Alright, so now we have very similar looking geometry to the other smooth, but now it's less of a problem for the UVs because we can just go into the UV texture editor now, and these will be more representative of the actual UV space, and they'll unwrap a little better. You can see there's a lot of geometry in here now. So if we look at that now, we have nice straight edges on our textures. So I think I'm gonna stick with the actual subdivided mesh for now, just because I want to be done with my mesh. I just want this to be kind of the final version for now. If I want to go back, it's actually pretty easy because we did most of the UV work already. If we wanted to go back into the simplified mesh and change something around, we could do that, and then we have our UV, so all we have to do is, you know, smooth it out once more. That's looking pretty good. There's a couple edges over here that still look kind of sharp. I might even smooth this once more. Let's see what happens. Smooth, smooth. Oh yeah, that's more like it. We still retain our nice sharp edges. We have an even smoother looking mesh. Now, a lot of your computers might be chugging at this point. If you're working on a laptop or kind of a lower powered machine, it's going to have trouble rendering something that has, what is this? Oh, it's only 8,000 faces. It's actually not much, but once you get a bunch of really high poly stuff in your scene, I mean all of your objects, and then you're rendering on top of that, it's going to be very taxing. So if you're having trouble editing one piece of geometry with this many faces, go to the lab, use their machines. They're not the best, but they're certainly better than you know, a lot of computers that you know have at your home, your mom and dad's computer, right? So let's move on. I think what I want to do is put all these on one UV space. So I'm going to darken my texture by hitting this button so it's not so jarring. And I'm going to start moving these. I'm going to resist hitting the automatic move tool because I think I could probably do a better job. Oop, a little bit of lag there. Even my computer's getting lag at this point now. No worries. Not nearly enough to stop us. Alright. And it might have to do with me trying to capture this video as well. Actually, I'm going to leave that in the same orientation. And then because I'm not as worried about this side, I'm going to shrink them down. And put them in a space that takes up a lot less texture room. So when you're working on your object and you're working on something that you want to duplicate a bunch of times in your scene, like an apple or any other like fruit, like a grape or something, you definitely want to lay out your UVs so that you could see it on all sides. The reason I'm laying out my UVs in this way is that I know I only want to see this side. I'm never going to render from this side. I haven't added the seeds. I have big texture seams on this side. That's not good. I optimized it for this side only. And if you want something that has, you know, that looks good all around, just follow the same techniques that we've been doing before based on, you know, game assets. That'll work nicely. Okay, so we have our UV set. You know, these seeds probably don't need a whole texture to themselves, so I'm actually going to grab all of those. And I'm going to grab the UVs, shrink them down, move them to the side. And then I'm going to grab all my stuff, grab those UVs again. And they're about this size, so I'm just going to leave them right there. And now we have all of our objects for this single asset all on one sheet. Cool, save. I'm gonna do a UV snap. I'm gonna actually put this in the correct folder for my project. Actually, so if you're watching this and you're kind of fed up with all these projects and their folders and having to select through everything, there's an easy way to set a project so that all your folders are in the same spot. And the way we do that is we come down here to set project. If I hit that, that's going to bring up a very similar looking window. And what this is literally setting where your file directory system is. So I'm going to go into my classwork. I have my still life, and I'm going to set it here. And I'm going to do create a default workspace, because this is what Maya used to basically tell you, like, I left this window open and I want it back when I reopen it, and it'll do that for you. So now that I have this set up, the next time I go into Polygon's UV snapshot and I browse, it's going to put me right into my it should have set me into my project. I forgot to hit the workspace root button. So now that I've done that, it'll bring me right into the correct folder. So if you're working on another project, it'll give you these specific folders for stuff that's being rendered and stuff we'll talk about later. But you can see my project right here. Hit the default, and there we go. I'm going to do a new folder, textures, and I'm going to save this as watermelon UV snap. Image format Targa 4096. I think that'll be fine for this project. I'm going to hit OK. Open up Photoshop. I'm just going to drag and drop my UVs. And then I'm going to save this as Photoshop watermelon PSD. Excellent. So I'm going to invert this like I did in class by just hitting Control I, and that makes my lines black, and it's a little easier to see when you're placing textures on stuff. So first I'm going to double click this so that it's unlocked, and now I'm going to look at some texture reference. So if I look back at my watermelon search, I can see you know, the basic design, or the basic idea of what goes into a watermelon. So let's see, let's grab really nice sized images. It's making me hungry. I like that one. I like that one. And I also want to take a really close look at the seeds. Obviously, there's lots of different kinds of watermelon seeds, but we're going to use these for now. All right. Cool. So in a lot of cases, what you would do is grab a selection of this watermelon image and apply it directly to your object, and that's okay. I want you guys to try and understand how important it is to develop skills for texture painting. And a lot of companies spend a lot of money hiring people that are really, really good texture painters. And a good example is Naughty Dog. Naughty Dog has a pedigree of using only hand-painted textures in all of their work. And if you think about something like that, that's pretty incredible, because what that means is everything is original artwork in that game. You know, they didn't take any pictures to use in the game. It's just all artists' work. It's pretty amazing. And of course, if you'd like to work at a place like Naughty Dog, even if you're not a texture artist, they're going to expect you to have similar skills as a 3D modeler or anything around there. So we're going to hand paint this. So I'm going to grab my mesh. My Photoshop project. My copy. I'm going to paste. I know I just said not to do this, but I'm actually using this image like I did in class as my color palette. So I'm going to try and grab like an average lighter green, because it looks like kind of like a zebra, you know, is a zebra black with white stripes, or is it the other way around? I'm considering this color green as the base and this darker color green as kind of the stripes, which I'll paint on later. So I think that's a good color green. I'm going to hide this layer and create a new one. And I'm going to set my opacity to 100 and flow to 100. And I'm using my Wacom tablet right now. And I'm just painting this in. If I wanted to, I could have actually used, you know, like a marquee select and the fill bucket. But this way, it's, you know, kind of a warm up for your wrist. I move my UVs up to the top so that I can see what it looks like, and I'm going to do multiply. Alright, and something that I tend to do from time to time is make a color palette for myself in one of the corners. So I'll take my base color and I'll color it in up here, and then I'll come back into my image and find the dark color green that I like, and then I'll add that to my palette as well, and maybe any other kind of unique looking colors that I can find. That seems to be mostly it. It looks like maybe there's like a more of a yellowish one here. I'll add that in as well. So basically, if I'm in my paintbrush, I can hold down the Alt key and I can select any one of these colors, and then I'll use that as a way to paint. So cool. Actually, let's take a real close look at the texture of this going on right here. So it's, you know, watermelons are very organic looking, and they're very similar to pumpkins actually, where they have those very nice tapering lines, but these are broken up even more so. So I'm going to create a new layer so that I'm painting on a unique layer, so that I don't have to worry about erasing the whole thing later. And I'm just going to put, I actually have to make sure that I have some shape dynamics and transfer turned on. Oops. And pressure. I'm going to turn my spacing way down. And this gives me more control over Gonna move my Wacom tablet closer to me. And what I'm doing right now is just adding in the major shape of these lines. I'm not worrying too much about the detail. I'm kind of just placing down the big structure first. You know, always block in your stuff first, then work your way down. So now I'm just adding in some more detail. Another good opportunity for a joke, which I don't have. Maybe something about melons. Okay, so this is starting to look alright. I actually want to get a little darker in the center of this, so I'm going to add a new color to my palette. And I'm just adding in the middle to add some more definition. And I'm going to add a couple patches. On this lighter green to break up my really pale green. And something that you'll notice about a lot of organic stuff is that it's typically lots of lines. And in this case, there's a lot of hard edges as well. So I'm going to look into my paintbrush selection and see if I can find something that would be good for lines. These kind of paintbrushes I don't use often, but that's why, because I don't like them. So I have a couple of hard edge brushes down near the bottom, which are my own creation. You can see that the brush tip is one of these small dots, and it's just spaced really high. And what that does, I'll zoom in some. That helps give me some really nice hard edge looks. Break up a lot of this really soft edge stuff. I'm kind of just doing this all around the edges of my soft work. I can always go back in and add lighter or darker. And something you'll notice is that I'm not actually a very fast texture artist. Really good texture guys can do this in a matter of minutes. I tend to get sloppy when I go fast. I like to take my time, but of course in the game industry, a lot of the time we don't have the luxury of time. So one way to increase your speed is to do what I just did and zoom out. And I like to leave the navigator up. You can add this by going into the window settings and bringing up navigator, and that'll give you kind of like this nice icon sized image. And that's a good idea for you know, it's nice to have a way to step back and look at the whole image from afar and give you a little bit more perspective. Maybe you'll notice that something doesn't look right from far away, but because you were looking so close up, you didn't notice it. I'll catch myself doing that quite often, actually. Alright, I think I had a couple instances where this bleeds through. And I'm not going in with an idea of what it's going to look at right now. I'm just going in very sporadically and trying to break up the look of my brush strokes. And that way you can get kind of nice organic looking stuff. And I'm going to go in with a new layer. I'm going to find kind of like a middle green and very lightly with my opacity set very low. Just do a couple strokes so that I get kind of single strokes in the whole image, and that'll help blend all of your other layers together. Now let's pick a darker one. Oops. I forgot to switch layers. That's okay though. We won't tell anybody. Alright, so that's roughly looking kind of like the surface of a watermelon. Watermelon has kind of like these tiger stripes, which I just noticed. So I'll add some of that structure in as well. And I'm constantly switching back in between adding and subtracting colors. This is another good way to break up a lot of your textures. And when you look at these, you'll see that there's actually a lot of extra green going on in between the darks and the lights. So I'm gonna find a brush whose spacing, when something like this, we'll add kind of some random spots. Should be using my color palette. And I'm actually not getting much scattering right now, so I'm going to change my scatter, count jitter, maybe a little bit. I want some rotation. Oops. Maybe some wet edges as well. And now I'm actually going to turn off my UVs just so they're not getting too much in the way. Alright, so this is kind of starting to look like the surface of a watermelon. So what's the next thing we need? We need kind of like the pink kind of soft meat, and we can find that here. View image, copy, paste, move this down. And I'm actually going to group all the work we already did, and that way we have full control over that whole group. Alright, and here, this one's kind of a little easier. If we look at this image closely, there is quite a bit of variation in the colors, but not so much specific. It's mostly kind of blotchy looking stuff. So I'm going to grab just a normal brush, make sure my spacing is on, and I have transfer. So I'm going to grab kind of like the darkest I can find. And I'm going to find some of the lightest I can find. And I think that should be good. So first I'm going to do a base of the darker color. Actually, I'm going to turn my spacing down because I don't need it so much yet, and I'm going to turn off transfer. Oh, and set my opacity to 100. So the closer your spacing is on your paintbrush, the kind of the more performance you're going to be taxing on your computer. And I'm still running mine in the background, so I'm leaving this down where it doesn't need to be. Alright, and now we can grab one of our texture brushes, find something that kind of looks like what we saw in our reference. Actually, I kind of like this one. This is obviously something that's gonna take a while because it's more of a computational brush. And that actually is not quite what I want. something like this looks like it'll work well. Ah, yes. And I'll show you what my brush looks like. I have the number 36 brush. I have a texture which has one of the standard textures on it. Dual brush mode is adding in another one of these scatter textures. There doesn't seem to be any transfer, although I think I will turn some on. And smoothing's turned on. Go back into my red. Add some of that back in. Actually, I don't want that texture. And I'm not worried about staying in the lines. I'm kind of going all over the place. I'm going to change my opacity down to about 50. Kind of lighten the whole thing. Alright, so that's looking, besides all that texture that's there, that's looking more like a watermelon should. When we look back at our reference, we can see that obviously, like most watermelons, it gets kind of whitish near the end. So I'm going to grab one of those colors and I'm going to go to a standard brush. I should really make this one of my standards. And now I'm going to turn my my spacing down. And that should be alright. Turn my opacity up. And actually I'm going to turn that down. And I'm going to add the lightish texture, kind of near where the rind meets the fruit. And obviously I'm being a little heavy-handed right now, and the reason that is that I'm less focused on I'm more focused on adding in this extra rind color than I am of deleting what I have with the fruit, because the fruit was really easy to make and I'm not too worried about that. Okay, so now I can start adding more of my fruit color to break up kind of the edges. I'll go back into my wacky brush. And let me turn off my UVs real quick. That reveals quite a bit. And we're just breaking up any of those hard, non-organic lines. And I'm going to come back in and add some more of my darker reds. Alright. So let me turn off my texture reference. And the last thing we need is the actual white rind. So I've already chose kind of a color like this. So I have to make sure that it's at least that dark. And I'm going to go into my hard brush. Set my opacity to high. Make a new layer. And just right away start adding this color. And you can see now that there's some inconsistency. I actually need to make this quite a bit lighter. Maybe not quite that white. So it seems like I'm also going to have to adjust my my fruit layer. So like I was saying in class, this type of work is best done very gradually. Small strokes, small changes, which eventually lead to a lot of big changes. I'm actually going to come up into my brush. I'm going to turn the hardness down way low so that's very, very soft. I'm going to turn off my UVs. There we go. And we're pretty much done. All we have to do now is really the seeds. And we were looking at those earlier. This is pretty much just a very nice dark gray, blackish. So I'm going to come under paintbrush tool. I'm going to grab a mostly black. Make sure my opacity is set to something reasonable. And then I'm going to add a little bit of brown. Hit cancel. A little bit of brown near the ends. Kind of help add a little bit of jazz. All right. So besides the sides that we're not too focused on, and which I could add very simple textures to, because I don't want to leave it white, I want to at least give it a base color. So let me do that real quick. So now I got my base texture there. And the reason we want at least a base texture is because even lighting or even color textures on the other side can affect the look of our entire render, because if you remember, we're going to be using global illumination, and that uses bounce lighting, and if the light happens to be coming on the opposite side of this, it might brighten up the table some and bleed it a little bit of red. All right, so I'm gonna save this. I probably should have saved that forever ago. And now I'm just gonna come down to my bottom layers. I'm gonna create a new layer, and I'm just gonna fill in with like a green or something, just so that I know where my texturing ends in case my UVs don't overlap. So I'm gonna save this as a Targa watermelon underscore diff. Save. I only need 24-bit because I'm not using alpha. And we're gonna have to make a new material. So I'm just gonna come into the material editor. I'm gonna create a new blend. I'm gonna slap that on. Double click. Oh, I'm so excited. I wanna see what my watermelon looks like with its texture. And workspace root, textures, watermelon diff. Oh yes, I like it. We also have to add it to, so what I just did is I selected all my seeds. I'm gonna right click on blend 1, which is our textured one, and now I'm gonna hit assign material to selected. And there we go. We've got a watermelon. So you can see right here, there's some work I'd have to do if I want to make this really perfect. I'd have to make sure to lighten up this stuff. I don't think I'm going to take the time to do that right now. I think I'm going to end this video as the diff portion of this. And we're going to go straight into adding our normal map and a specular map. So I'm going to end this video and we'll come back. Thanks, guys. Hang in there. I promise. It's worth the effort.